Hold up.
Right, you might now be thinking, okay, Rose, I've created my rich pins, I know how analytics works, I've optimized my profile for SEO, I've created my group boards, I know how to create the pins. Now, how do I pin? How to pin? How often? Well, thankfully, this is a very short and sweet module, and it should get you off to the right start. Now, when you're deciding how often you should pin, you might realize that you've read several blog posts now, and the advice will vary. I have heard advice such as 60% of other people's content, 40% of yours. I've heard 100% your content. Now, this advice will vary depending on the expert that you are listening to. But I have found that the best formula that works for me is 50% your content and 50% other people's content. And as you have hundreds and hundreds of blog posts and content, or if you have an e-commerce store, as you have thousands of products, this could most probably go a lot higher because you have a lot of fresh content to share. But the sweet spot is 50% yours, 50% other people's content. Now, you want to pin 20 to 30 times a day. So if you're pinning 20 times a day, 10 of those pins in the day should be your pins. I'm going back to URLs on your website, and 10 pins being split up amongst other third-party pins from other valuable resources on Pinterest. If it's 30 pins a day, it will be 15 pins from your website and 15 pins from other people's websites. Now, if you don't have that much content, I highly recommend creating variations of pins. And this is something that we covered earlier on, constructing the perfect pin. Make sure that you have different variations. You can try different titles, different imagery, different lengths, because one style look won't necessarily resonate with everybody. Now, rather than having one pin with one image and one type of text, imagine having three and attracting three different types of people back to your URL. That's potentially 3 times more traffic. And if you don't have that much content and you create several pins for one URL, then you have more of a chance of circulating that URL through Pinterest. Creating variation of pins there's nothing wrong with that. It's actually encouraged by Pinterest. So when you're creating that first blog post, make sure that you have it in mind that you want to create at least 2 variations, test 2 different titles. And when you're creating variations, you also want to vary the descriptions. So you want to see if maybe one description brings in more traffic than another. Don't just change the actual visual of the pin. Look at the title, look at the description of the pin, but you also want to make sure it's optimized. That's very important. You want to make sure it's optimized so that people can find your pins when they're searching for it, as a majority of people are going to be searching to get the results that they see, and they're not necessarily browsing profiles. Now, if you don't have content, start with a smaller percentage and work your way up. So if you don't have enough content to pin 20 to 30 times a day with 50% your content and 50% somebody else's content, start with maybe 60 to 70% third-party content and 30% yours, until you can get yourself to that sweet spot so you can work your way up. This is why it's very difficult for people who don't have a blog or fresh content to do well on Pinterest, because you can't circulate the same thing over and over again. Even if you create variations and you only have 3 blog posts and you create maybe 3 or 4 different pins for those 3 blog posts, there's only so far that's going to get you if you want to pin consistently 20 to 30 times a day. So this is why it's important to create a system that will allow you to create content consistently, so you never run out of things to post on Pinterest. Now, you also want to see an increase in site traffic. So if you're pinning all these pins every day, but you're not seeing an increase in site traffic, it means that your traffic is most probably not going to increase. Now, that could mean many, many things. Your pins are not engaging enough. Your pins are not optimized. Your pins are not being reached. If it's not being reached, it means it's not showing up in search. Again, meaning it's an SEO issue. So I'd say every month, I wouldn't go crazy because Pinterest doesn't necessarily update the statistics that fast. I'd say once a week, check your analytics, your Pinterest analytics. You see in the first column here, these are actually my statistics. it shows the amount of people that are actually viewing my profile, and you see the amount of people that reach the pins from my profile. Now you can see that only 20,000 people have actually viewed my profile, but 138,000 have reached some sort of pin that's come from my profile. This is why, although it's important and it helps having boards, it's not as important as us optimizing each individual pin. Because like I've mentioned before, and I'll mention again, people are searching for your content on Pinterest. And when they search, your pins come up in the smart feed. So if your pin is not optimized, it's not going to show up, and it won't be exposed to hundreds of thousands of people like you can see on my profile. You'll also see on the last column is the activity for the pins for my URL. So these are the amount of people that are viewing the pins that are related to my URL. As you can see, this number goes up and down. It does fluctuate. Nothing's ever constant on Pinterest, so you will have those days where traffic goes up and down, which is typical of anything else. But more and more people are viewing my pins, which means I'm definitely doing something right. My pins are most probably optimized, so they're showing up in the smart feed. My pins are engaging, so people are sharing my pins and saving it to the profile, and hopefully they're also clicking. So don't get too focused on the average daily impressions without looking at the clicks. So you also want to make sure that as daily impressions are going up, your clicks are also going up. So when you going further to view the activity going on with the pins from your profile, it will actually show you how many people are clicking through, and your Google Analytics will be a good indicator as to how much traffic is coming through to your website as well. Now, as of April 2018, Pinterest did announce that the first 5 pins you pin of the day are prioritized. This means that the 5 pins of the day, first 5 pins of the day are the most important. So if they are the most important, I would highly recommend that the first 5 pins are pins that are going back to your URL, and preferably pin those pins onto your own boards. It would give your boards more weight and your pins more weight. So this is a change that only happened recently, and it's still rolling out. So some people may see the effects, some may not see the effects. Give it a couple of months. But if you use a scheduler, if you do manual pinning, and schedulers is something we are going to cover in a later module, make sure that the first 5 pins that are scheduled to go out are your pins, and preferably pin them to your profile. If you're manually pinning, make sure that when you wake up, the first 5 pins are pins from your URL, and preferably pin them to your profile.